Hello, everyone. Welcome to Business Performance USA. We're bringing you a webinar today called The Basic Truths of Background Screening, Transforming Your Business Decisions, and this is part one of a three-part series. I am Cynthia Stewart, and I'm Managing Partner for Evermore Services, and I'll be your host today. And we have with us your presenter, Nancy Lynn Roberts, who is a lawyer, and also she's owner and COO, Chief Operating Officer for Track One. We want to make sure that this webinar is worth your time today, so we encourage you to go ahead and ask any questions using your chat feature, or also there's a question feature you should see from the control panel on GoToWebinar. I'll be monitoring those so that you can ask questions, and I'll make sure that Nancy gets to hear those questions and gives you her answers. If you have a question about today, about any specific situation in your workplace or about today's webinar, you can go ahead and email victor@businessperformanceusa.org. And also, please know that these webinars are being recorded, and you'll be able to find those if you are a member of Business Performance USA. So with that information, I'd like to go ahead and introduce you to your presenter today. Nancy Roberts, we're so honored to have Nancy. She's the owner of Track One. That is a nationally accredited background screening firm serving organizations in all 50 states. She has experience serving as Chief Operations Officer, compliance professional, risk manager, and educated business attorney since 1992, with specific and long-term industry experience in entrepreneurial endeavors, healthcare, nonprofit, for-profit, staffing, employment, background screening, and technology. As you can hear, she's very much in the space to be giving this webinar today. She has an established record of reducing and or managing risk for both entrepreneurial and established companies and has built from the ground up comprehensive compliance programs and processes for multi-corporate systems and small businesses alike. And no wonder they decided recently to make her the current chair of the National Accreditation Program for all of US-based background screening firms. So that's an active organization that she's been a member of since 2005. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn over the screen to our presenter, and she can take it from here. So Nancy, we'll see if this is going to work. We've had a little bit of difficulty. We're looking for Nancy's presentation, and there we go. Thank you, Nancy.
Great. Thank you, Cynthia. All right, well, thank you, everyone, and let me just say that it's a pleasure to be here today. We are creating a series of educational opportunities through these live and then also to be available recorded webinars. So if you are in the more advanced areas of background screening, this will be a very basic starting point approach, but as we proceed throughout the series, we will get more and more advanced, even addressing some of the more recent events that are taking place with our various regulators and some specific cases that will educate you and alert you to things that you need to be aware of. But for today, really the focus is making sure that we are all starting on a firm foundation in the area of background screening, which companies have been doing for a number of years now. So with that, let me get us started. In the past, background screening really has been viewed from what I consider a fear-based approach. In other words, I'm going to do screening up front because I'm afraid of what I might find out later or what someone else might find out later about somebody that I decide to hire or allow onto my property as a volunteer or allow into my property as a tenant. So that fear-based approach is something that is a good rationale for background screening, But something that I really, as a risk manager, try to get my clients and my colleagues to think about is that really what background screening is all about is starting your relationships from a place of knowledge with quality information. And when you have truth at the beginning of the information, facts and information that you need to make a quality decision, then you start making smarter decisions. And as a result, your organization is more sustainable over the long haul. And I should add to that that your relationships, whether it's with an employee, a volunteer, or a tenant, are more sustainable in the long haul because you had the information from the beginning. And I should add to that, you continued to make sure you had information throughout the relationship. So it's a little bit of a change in thinking as opposed to a fear-based thinking model. It's a thinking model that says, I'm going to start from a place of knowledge, and with that knowledge, I can decide what level of risk I'm willing to assume, and then I can make quality decisions going forward. So one of the first questions that I always ask a client and I should say I'm not practicing law as in this moment in my life, although I certainly advise my organizations all the time and give information to clients that help them make quality decisions. But one of the first things we say to companies that we're serving in the background screening industry is that they really need to understand why they want to do background screening. Now, I just shared with you that the origins of background screening are that fear-based thinking. And in fact, the statistics kind of prove that out. These results are from a SHRM, Society for Human Risk Managers survey. So this may not apply to some of the tenant screening contexts or the volunteer screening contexts, but this does give you a good feel for what people in companies and in organizations today, this was a 2012 survey, think about why they're doing background screening. And you can see that over half of them really are avoiding the risk of a negligent retention claim. That statistic is comparable in the other two areas, tenant screening and volunteer screening. And second of all, they are trying to do that more progressive thing of establishing a safe and healthy workplace environment. We have 36% of responders saying that they want to reduce fraud and theft. And then 28% indicate that they have to comply with contractual or regulatory requirements, and that's why they're doing background screening. And finally, there is this concept that just overall, I want to assess the trustworthiness of a candidate by looking into their past and finding out information about them. Now, most of the people who indicated that in that survey were really talking about the idea that I give these candidates or these applicants an opportunity to disclose, and then if they don't disclose to me, that tells me something about their trustworthiness. And we all know that in many of our states now, we are prohibited from doing that. There are actually ban the box laws in about 10 states. And in those states, they are saying you can't have a box on your application in the employment setting that says, tell me if you are a convicted felon or have a previous conviction of a misdemeanor. And then use that information or the failure of them to disclose information as a basis for terminating. So there's been a recent change that could give rise to those answers to change a little bit in the near future. And I'll leave that comment. So overarchingly, what I want to say is I do think that the reasons that people are doing background screening today are that they want to lower their risks and establish healthy environments. Other reasons that we know of and that we have clients say to us all the time, which were not options or choices in that SHRM survey, is that they really trust the people that they work with. And we hear this a lot, in particular from our volunteer organizations. They know their volunteers, they trust them. but they think they have an obligation to verify that the information or the background on this person is such that they're safe to work with the people that they're going to be putting them to work with. So it's this exercise of due diligence and a trust but verify mindset that ends up establishing credibility with people that are your stakeholders, whether it's your customers, whether it's your other tenants, whether it's people who are members of your volunteer organization. If you're finding out this information up front, then you somehow become more credible as an organization. Obviously, an additional reason that we hear from a number of people is that they really just want to know more about the person before they decide to get into relationship with them. That really speaks to that first slide that we talked about. Starting a relationship from a place of knowledge is always a healthier way to start a relationship. And finally, just improving that get to know you process actually improves the quality of our relationship. So hopefully that gives you a big scope picture of why organizations today are really engaged actively in background screening.
We have a quick question, Nancy.
Absolutely.
The question is, do companies typically background screen more at the front of a relationship with a potential candidate, or are they background screening employees that are actually working for them?
Great question, and we're actually going to cover some of that. And I believe I have some statistics associated with that on a couple of slides that are coming up. So if I could answer that in just a moment, I think we will get to that. My first answer is on the front end, they are definitely doing their background screening before they accept them into their organization. Although depending on the type of screening, oftentimes what's happening is there's some sort of conditional offer subject to the background screening results coming back with a final change to the relationship based on the results of that background screen. And we'll talk about that in just a minute.
Okay, very good.
Any other
Thank you.
questions?
Not at the time, not
Uh-huh.
at this time.
So how are companies using background screening? For me, that's one of the really the second question that an organization needs to be asking itself. How are other companies in my industry? How are other companies of my same size using background screening? What we've tried to put together for you today is an overarching picture that's focused mostly in the employment screening area. And then I'll share with you a little bit of insight in the other two areas, which is the tenant screening and volunteer screening, with a little less statistics in those two areas. So in the employment screening area, and I think this will end up speaking to the question that was just asked. First question is, who are we screening? Well, in that SHRM survey in 2012, we had respondents, companies of all sizes answering, and 69% of those companies are screening all employees. I should add to this that 87% of the companies surveyed said they are actually doing screening, so a very high level of involvement with screening. And of those 87%, 69% are screening all of their employees. 18% are screening some, and 14%, and I rounded up on that 86.3% to an 87 number, 14% are saying that they are screening no employees. Those same statistics bear out approximately across our own client base. And let me share just a little bit there. We are a national firm. We do have over 10,000 clients that we're actively billing. We have 50% of our clientele in the employment and volunteer screening space and 50% in the residential or tenant screening space. And so when I talk about our own client statistics, I'm really sharing with you insights from the clients that we are actively serving today. So our tenant screeners, for the most part, are the ratio of the stats would fall in this same category, where if they're doing screening, the vast majority, in that 70% to 74% range, are actually doing all of their tenants. And a much lower number than 18% is actually only doing some of their tenants. And an even smaller number, about 10%, are in the we don't screen our tenants range. Most of those that are not screening their tenants are what I call private property owners that have 4 or 5 or 6 tenants that they're screening for, rather than the vast majority of our client base, which is large size property management companies or large size multifamily housing organizations or housing authorities. Excuse me. So one of the next questions in the employment arena, which I think has been asked, is when are we doing our screening? Are we doing it after a contingent offer is made, after an interview is conducted, or before an interview is conducted? I think when background screening was first done, very few people employed background screening before an interview. We saw in the early years of background screening a lot of people implementing background screening criteria or practices immediately after an interview. But over the past 4 to 5 years, we've seen the statistics move to what you see on the screen today, where 62% of our client base is conducting their screening after some form of contingent offer is made. Now, some of that has to do with the type of screening that you're doing. If you're doing drug testing, for example, if you're doing fingerprints, if you're doing any sort of medical testing, if you're doing any sort of testing that has to do with workers' comp results, that has historically almost always been post-contingent offer. The real shift in those statistics has happened with companies that are primarily doing some sort of identity screening and criminal background screen. The EEOC's movement in this area and the strong stance that they've been taking over the past year has caused a lot of companies to move that practice of background screening to the post-contingent offer. So I think that's bearing out in the employment numbers that you're looking at here. Obviously, in the tenant screening arena, those same concerns do not currently apply. There is a United States Supreme Court case that is pending and is looking to be decided towards the end of this year, which our firm was pleased to be able to help at least voice some wording into an amicus brief for, and that Supreme Court case is known as the Mount Holly case, and we should get a little bit of insights on whether some of the same discrimination questions that have come up with criminal background screening in the employment context may also now exist or apply in the tenant screening context. Clearly, the EEOC concerns have not risen in the volunteer context, so this same move to post-contingent offer we have not seen in the volunteer screening context. So how often are we repeating our screening? Clearly, the vast majority of our client base in the employment sector excuse me, is completing their screening or is conducting their screening annually. I will say that in the volunteer screening space, we are seeing that number more like every 2 years. We have been an advocate with our client base, not just simply because we want to make more money as a service provider, but rather because we see what kind of things can arise in the course of a calendar year with a volunteer pool. But we have really been an advocate for several years now with our various nonprofit organizations for annual screening. We're still seeing some of the larger denominations debate and discuss movement from overarching standards that say every 3 years down to every 1 year. And we, like we said, have been advocates for that. Certainly in the employment screening sector, that push for improved quality screening has happened, and we're seeing a majority of employment screeners conduct that annually. Tenant screeners typically are screening on the front end. We do not see annual screening as frequently in that space, although I think that that is beginning to change as awareness is being driven up on the employment side and in the employment screening arena. So what categories of people are being screened by the companies that we are serving? Again, this is the national results. Boards and executive members, leaders, managers, professionals, employees and staff, contractors. You may be surprised at the amount of contractor work that is done. We are integrated with several contractor platforms, and that is definitely an increased focus point for background screening practices, and really is being viewed more and more as a high risk area as the IRS has come in and reset their rules for contractors as well. Clearly in the temporary staffing space, that's another area, and vendor management space. And then of course volunteers and visitors onto school grounds. And then we're seeing more and more of our schools move to having parents, and our associations move to having members, as well as residents of college campuses, of long-term care facilities, and even some nonprofit organizations that offer housing on a short-term basis. They are moving to screening even in those short-term contexts. So we've definitely seen a situation where screening has rapidly expanded to all areas, all people, and we've seen that happen over the course of the last 5 years. Hopefully that answered the question earlier. Cynthia, do you have any more questions that have come in before I move?
No, not at this time, Nancy. Great
Great.
information.
Thank you. So other reasons to think about as you're considering whether your organization may need to be engaging in screening. Obviously, anywhere where membership privileges are granted, we are conducting screening for professional groups, for medical licensing boards, for example, for membership associations, medical staffs, and social clubs. Those are all areas where screening should be evaluated as a tool for lowering risk, and those are all areas where we are in fact engaged in screening for our client base. Also, anytime access is being granted, so that falls into the contractors, to your vendors. If you are allowing temporaries onto your premises, making sure that either your staffing provider or you are conducting screening before you allow them onto your premises is advised. Volunteers, visitors, residents, all are all situations where access is being granted. Again, credentials are being issued if you're certifying, accrediting, licensing, or giving any sort of rights or privileges to somebody through a credentialing process. Ministry certification is another area where we have a lot of nonprofits evaluating their background screening practices. And then obviously anywhere where risks are high because of vulnerable populations or some form of confidential information. So one question we get a lot is what types of screening are most common? And I'm going to share again some of the stats, or the information that is not national now, although some of this is consistent with our national data. But I'm sharing right now a lot of information based on what we see in those three spaces of screening that we are so actively engaged in. So a large number of our clients are using identity verification tools, which include a social security verification tool of some sort. With that, there are different types of verifiers. We can look at the credit headers. We can get address histories that are tied to that social security number. Usually those address histories are tied to utilities and other credit credit information, but rather than actually seeing creditor information, what you're getting is just a consistent address history. I will say that many of the sources that are out there today for address histories are a little bit, the accuracy can be questionable. So if you're working with a screening provider, you definitely want to be asking them what are they doing to eliminate duplications, to validate those address histories, or to verify them against other information in their database. The other thing is you can look up an SSN based on and obtain an employment history. Those two tools are often tied together with criminal background screening products so that you are targeting your criminal background checking and going deep in places where people previously worked or lived, in addition to doing maybe a broader across the country database type search. So a lot of companies are tying tools together like that, and we ourselves do that with a lot of our clients today. An additional one is obviously the E-Verify tool, which any company can voluntarily participate in. Some states require it, other states it's still a voluntary option. But you can also use third parties like a background screening company to conduct those searches. I will just momentarily indicate that dramatic changes have recently been implemented to the E-Verify process. So if your organization is using electronic or E-Verify as a tool currently, you need to be aware of those changes because it has a lot to do with how you interact with your employees and with your third-party screening provider. And finally, credit reports generally in the employment sector is another area where people are doing screening. Now, in the tenant screening side, credit reports are commonplace. In the employment screening and volunteer screening side, they are much more tied to the type of position for which the person's being considered. And in fact, some states have really implemented legislation to restrict the use of credit reports in the employment sector to particular positions or particular industries. So you need to be aware of your state's movement in that area. Criminal history information is another obvious common screening type. There's a lot of language and a lot of misunderstanding in this area, so I want to just give a good overview. A lot of people talk about a national criminal database. I want to just clear up right here and now, there is no national criminal database that exists that is one standard database. Now, the FBI manages a database. That is one so-called national criminal database. But there are a lot of national, or what we really like to refer to as multi-jurisdictional criminal databases. Some of those are federal information, some of those are state information. Most companies like ours have assembled information from a variety of sources and then are maintaining that information over multi-year period. They are eliminating expungements, expunged records. They are adding to that information on a regular basis. I think understanding how often your screening provider is updating that information is important, and also understanding that even if your screening provider is updating that information on a biweekly or biweekly or monthly basis, those original jurisdictions may not be updating their information more often than every year. So there are two questions to be asked about how current the information is when you're looking at using data-based information. One is how often your screening provider is updating the information, and two is how often the original jurisdiction from which a record came is updating their information to the general public in batch, when obtained in batch uploads. So the other thing that probably needs to be spoken about in this area is screening providers in different areas of the country are doing different things. the Fair Credit Reporting Act speaks to accuracy of information, and knowing and understanding that is going to be the subject matter of future webinars that we provide. And we'll be talking about making sure that your screening provider is verifying the records that they are reporting to you. It does affect turnaround times. It can slow down the process, but that the benefit is the original source is we as a screening provider are updating that information with the original source before producing a final report to you. And that additional step can be very important for our screening providers or for our clients. So again, we'll go into more detail about that. But these, in addition to these multi-jurisdictional criminal databases, there are county criminal researches that are searches that are done with county criminal courthouses in particular counties. There are federal criminal record searches that are conducted that are different from the multi-jurisdictional and county criminal searches. There are national sex offender public registries as well as state sexual offender public registries. And then, of course, there's fingerprinting. So understanding when you're talking to your screening providers about what is included in your criminal background check is very important. An additional common screening type is verifications of credentials. Typically, this involves a person, a researcher, a live person actually going to the original issuer of the credentials to verify that that credential was in fact obtained, and verify that the information provided to you, the client, is the same as the information that has been provided to provided by the original issuer of that degree or that academic record, etc. What's important in this area is understanding that when you as a client are typing into an online background screening platform any information, you want to make sure that you're providing as much information as you have at your fingertips about those degrees that were obtained. So the more information you get on the front end, the better quality of a verification that can happen on the back end through your screening provider. Additional verifications that you should be considering and that other companies are considering are employment, military records, license and certifications, personal professional references. And I'll add in the tenant screening area that prior rental history, prior evictions, hot check histories or writing are some other common areas that people are screening in. Again, here are some other common screening types that get a little bit more granular. So the more we go into our list, the less common these areas are, unless you're in a particular industry or engaged in a particular type of position, screening for a particular type of position. Then I think other types of screening, it looks like we've got a slight typo here, but so ignore the identity verification using Social Security records, but other types of screening are federally regulated specific screening, state law specific screening, industry specific screening, or international screening. Now, we just came back from our National Association for Professional Background Screeners, and I want to let you know that we are all, as a body of professional background screening firms, really evaluating the increased use of social media for a screening practice. And we're also all really carefully evaluating some new tools that we've seen arise in the marketplace to allow for social media screening. I will tell you that I'm aware of some tools. I'm aware of two really well-known tools currently. One of those tools is not what I consider a compliant tool. So really asking questions about the Fair Credit Reporting Act and compliance will be a subject matter of future conversations or future webinars, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention that right now, because that is such a common conversation point with clients today. So the use of social media information, how to go about using that properly, how to do it in such a way that neither you are put at risk for having information that you shouldn't be aware of, or that you're put at risk for violating privacy of the individuals who are applying with your organization. One of the questions we get asked is, when people are using criminal information to screen out, what are some of the most common criteria that you're using? The overarching response, the broad answer to those questions are the numbers that you see here, which come from that SHRM survey. So again, I want to emphasize that these statistics really are coming directly from a group of companies doing employment-based screening. I will share with you that they are consistent with what we hear and see in our statistics behind the scenes from our tenant screening community. So we have, as most of our companies, setting as a disqualifier violent felony convictions. Companies report that 74% of them are using non-violent felony convictions to rule out. And I think that's an area that has raised some real questions for the EEOC, for example. And 60% of them are using violent misdemeanor convictions. What I think is important to note, that when SHRM conducted this survey, they had 0 people respond with information to suggest that, for example, non-violent traffic offenses were being used in anything other than driving positions. So these are pretty broad-based questions, broad-based statistics. There's a lot more granular information out there, but I wanted to give you an idea of what kind of criminal criteria are being used currently. Now, the other question that's asked is, when I conduct this criminal background check, at what point in my process should I be asking or giving an applicant the opportunity to explain a criminal record that comes up in their background? Well, in that SHRM survey, the companies explained that, or reported that 58% of them are giving that opportunity prior to making a decision. Surprisingly, we still have 20% of our companies making a decision, then giving a client or an applicant an opportunity to explain the record that came up. Obviously, from just a compliance and a risk manager's standpoint, giving that person the opportunity to explain to you their background or criminal background record that appeared before you make a decision really lowers your risk, whether or not an attorney has tell you it's mandated by any EEOC guidance or otherwise. So we have always been an advocate for giving that opportunity to someone prior to making that decision. Finally, what about the use of arrests? I really want to encourage everyone to go to the EEOC's criminal guidance that they issued in 2012. If you just simply type that into your Google, you will see that pop up. It's made available on the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission's website. We will have an entire webinar about that criminal guidance and where it stands today from an enforcement and regulatory standpoint. But for now, I want to encourage you to look to that guidance to really look at how to use arrests properly. Cynthia, let me just comment. There we go. I seem to have had, there we go. Are there any questions before I move on? Because we are close to wrapping up the the
Yeah,
session.
we do have questions,
Great.
Nancy. Um, First of all, it seems that people will assume that if they're working with a background screener, that they can assume that the information is legal. Is it possible that they're working with a background screener and they're obtaining information that is not legal?
It is possible, absolutely. And let me talk a little bit about that. Most background screening companies, like ours, are providing information to lots of people. And what is legal for one group may not be legal for another group. So, understanding what information you are receiving and making sure that your organization is receiving and ruling out the information that they should not consider improperly is very important. Additionally, I should say that this is really an evolving area. Background screening, the background screening industry and online background screening industry um, has been around for a long time in different ways, but the move to aggressive online background screening and the databasing of information in this country, the move to electronic records and batch uploads by our courthouses has really increased over the past 10 to 15 years, with particular emphasis on growth in the last 10 years. And just by way of understanding, we have an organization, a national organization, the National Association for Professional Background Screeners, is only 10 years old. We experienced our 10-year anniversary this year, and a lot of that really has to do with the sudden boom in this area and the sudden rapid technology changes in databasing and storing and transferring information. So it's a field where the changes have been very rapid over the past 10 years. Even in the past year, we as an industry and you as clients have seen dramatic changes in approaches to how to use criminal information, regulatory thinking on how to use criminal information, how to use credit information. So the changes are happening rapidly at the regulatory and on the legal fronts. The technology and the information, I think, is probably trying to catch up with that.
So it's really important that people who are working with background screeners know quite a bit about the company itself. So thank you for that, Nancy. We have a few more questions, but we can go ahead and proceed and we'll ask those at the end.
Great. So really, with that, I'm sorry, I seem to be stuck on my, there we go. The reality is there are bad people that do bad things. We've seen in the media of late, in particular, some horrific case examples of situations that have taken place. Um, I want to really make sure that terminology in those situations is being used properly. When you are talking about a government contractor going through a security clearance level background check, the quality and the amount of information, excuse me, and screening conducted for a check of that magnitude and that nature may be of a very different caliber than what is appropriate and what the right quality is for a background check, for example, of visitors to a public premises. So really putting into context the type of screening being done, the industry being screened, the purpose for which someone is being screened is important.
We
Please
live,
excuse me, I had to
yeah,
mute for
we
one
live
moment.
in Tulsa and this is
So the question
Allergy
that
Alley.
I think all of us need to be asking, excuse me, Cynthia.
Go ahead, Nancy.
the question we all need to be asking is, what exactly do you want to know? When do you want to know it? And what information will you be expected to discuss with the person about which you find out the information, before or after you engage with them? And with that, I want to really encourage everyone to use this time to start to educate themselves about how and why they're doing background screening, understanding the policies and procedures that you'll need to have in place in order to do your background screening, and understanding what information you want to obtain and what decisions you will make based on the information that you obtain. I hope that as we engage in this series of webinars, we'll be able to walk you through really putting together a quality background screening program. And again, we'll be recording these on a regular basis over the next few months. So I hope you enjoy the series. And with that, Cynthia, I think we've reached the end of our information.
Thank you so much, Nancy, and we appreciate you uh, giving us. There's so much information. I have learned so much, and what I realized is I might want to come back and actually look at this again. So, for anyone that would like to see this webinar again, you will have that opportunity. And so, Nancy, go ahead and send it back to me, and I'm going to show people how they might be able to participate and watch this webinar again, or share it with others that they feel would really benefit from this information. And we'll see. Let me see if I can bring this back to my screen.
Okay,
Okay. Okay, folks. We're just switching screens. Bear with us for one moment. What you should be seeing now is businessperformanceusa.org. We mentioned that at the beginning. This website is a place where you can come to find information like what you're hearing today. If you become a member, you can log into our community, and membership is complimentary. It's free, if you will. You're seeing my face there. And when you log in, you can go to the videos, and you will find Nancy's video from today, among others, from other webinars that we've been giving. So this is a way that you can come back and see this webinar and look at it and take notes and engage more questions inside the community. Also, I believe that we have out here this PDF that you can download, the basic truths about background screening. So that's out there as well. It's an infographic that we would give to you complimentary. So with that, I'd like to just say thank you. We do have Tuesday webinars coming back, and let me get to my last screen so we can talk about what's coming up. Next month, Nancy will be back to talk more about background screening basics. As you got from today, there's so much information for us to learn about this as this industry grows and as people tap into these online databases and understand the legalities of that as employers. So, very important information, and we appreciate Nancy as one of our executive volunteers providing this information. You can also come back next week and hear from Victor Dominguez on the high tech marketing with a human touch, and he talks in the marketing space. Dr. Jeff Stewart will be back the week after that for change execution, and then I myself will talk about rules of engagement. So we have many webinars coming forth, and we hope that you'll be back to join us. We thank you for your participation today. You've been great. Thanks for the questions that you've posed to all of us. And with that, we'll end the webinar. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Nancy. Bye-bye.